Sometimes love isn't enough. As an adoptive mom, people would often say this to me, as if to imply I couldn't love my son enough to change behaviors or heal his trauma, so I should probably just give up. At least that's how I took those four powerful words, which had buried themselves deeply in my mind, leading me to doubt my ability to parent my child. Sometimes love isn't enough. That is the truth. Oftentimes, you need love and powerful, personalized tools to raise a child who's experienced trauma and disrupted attachment, or a child who you're struggling to connect with. I am on a mission to help parents raising kids with a tricky past to show up with unconditional love and practical tools to lovingly manage even the most challenging of times. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Plus, if you like what you hear, I'd love for you to leave a review. Now let's get to the good stuff. Welcome back to Sometimes Love Isn't Enough. I am just so grateful that you are here hanging out with me and listening. And I hope that you are finding some hope, some strategies, some connection here. So, in today's episode, I actually wanted to discuss something that I had mentioned a couple of episodes ago, which is one of my favorite questions that I share with my clients. And so, um, what is that question? Well, let's first talk about, well, let me just share the question and then we'll talk about kind of how this applies. But the question is, what does my child need from me right now? So let's talk about this a little bit, right? Because as parents dealing with extremely challenging behaviors, we are often in situations where we have to jump in, right? We have to respond or react to what is happening in our home. For some of us, this is, it happens a couple times a week. For others of us, it happens many, many times a day. And so we're often faced with situations where we as parents need to know what to do. Oftentimes when people are coming to me, that's what they want, right? They're struggling with behaviors and they want the behaviors to stop or at least lessen because for many of us the behaviors have taken over. I know in my home, I um I felt and would often talk about that behaviors in our home had stopped vacations, stopped dinner plans, stopped us from hanging out with friends because they were so frequent and so extreme and scary sometimes that I didn't feel comfortable going out to eat sometimes. I didn't feel comfortable taking my family to a friend's picnic. I certainly didn't feel comfortable hopping onto an airplane and traveling somewhere. And so I, as a parent, was desperate for solutions to change behaviors. I was desperate for any kind of tool that would help me regain peace at home so that we could do things that I wanted to do as a family. Family time I value so much. And I felt like because behaviors had escalated, I felt like I wasn't able to provide that together time or at least happy together time, right? We were together all the time. But oftentimes we felt trapped in our home because I didn't feel comfortable leaving the house with the kids when things were so hard. And so I know as parents that we can often be faced with challenging behaviors and in each of our homes they can look very different or they might look quite the same. I know in my experience, I said an episode or two ago that I I I will be um, very careful about talking about specific behaviors, but one thing that I can share, feel comfortable sharing, is that the behaviors that I experienced related to attachment were so very different than 20 years of working in special education, or 20 years of working with individuals who were neurodivergent or on the autism spectrum. The behaviors that were happening in my home were different behaviors, and also because I'm mom and I had a different um, role in the relationship, they felt very different. They felt very personal. Even though I would tell myself that they weren't, they felt very personal. So, oftentimes we are faced with challenging behaviors, and it's hard for us as parents to know what to do, right? Some experts will tell us that we need to be predictable and that we need to give predictable responses to our kids' behaviors, predictable reactions. They need to know what's going to happen. And so that might look like predictable consequences, predictable rewards for when things are going well. I quickly learned in my home that predictability in that way was harder. I was actually great at um, providing very predictable incentives or rewards for good behavior. I was great at being very predictable in the way that I responded to things, but that did not work in my home. And I think that that was a direct reflection of a child from a tricky past whose brain was designed to kind of be in that fight or flight mode all the time. And so, what that would look like in our home is that I would create, like a reward system, maybe a token system or a reward chart. And we would get so close to earning the reward. And then the behavior would happen kind of like right before the reward. That happened so predictably and routinely, and I would adjust the way that the system looked. I was so motivated to try to figure out a system that could work. But what I quickly learned was that a system isn't what my son needed, right? I also had heard somebody in our life, an expert in our life, had said, and I wasn't big on consequences. That wasn't really the way that I had been trained professionally, and it wasn't the way that I wanted to parent. Um, I remember hearing that there is no bigger consequence to your son than losing his birth family. And I remember that that hit me so hard in just realizing like, you know, timeouts are not going to work. And I don't think I ever really even tried them with him because I knew that he didn't need consequences, but I wasn't able to put my finger on what he did need. So once I started working with more and more families and really learning all about being a mindset coach, what I realized was that what my son had needed when he was younger, when things were so hard, wasn't another consequence. It wasn't another reward system. It wasn't more behavior management strategies. What my son really needed from me and what your kids need from you is for you to show up with that trauma lens on. And my brain knew that, right? I felt like I was looking at behaviors through a trauma lens because it was easy to tell myself when things were amuck in my home. It was easy to tell myself, well, but this behavior is coming from trauma. And so, I wouldn't get mad at him or frustrated at him, but I would get frustrated with myself because what I was doing wasn't working. What I was doing wasn't actually showing up for him with that trauma lens. What I was doing was having that trauma lens in my head, but not really showing up for him. So, like I said, the question that I want to pose to you to ask yourself in the moment is, what does my child need right now? When we think about different situations that can happen in our home, maybe your child is, I don't know, dumping shampoo all over the bathroom, or they're chasing the cat with a pair of scissors, or they've um, stolen another phone from school, or they, um, I don't know, peed all over the laundry room, whatever's happening in your home. When our kids who come from a tricky past are engaging in behaviors, I really want to challenge you to look at every behavior as if it's a reflection of trauma. And, I often hear parents say, yeah, but, kids in general will disobey. Kids in general will be defiant. Kids, it is normal for kids to go through phases. I don't disagree with you at all. But I know that in my experience, with all of the training that I've had, with all of the families that I've worked with raising my son, I don't feel qualified to tell you which of their behaviors are driven by trauma and which of them are just your child just going through a developmental phase. I can't do that. I don't know how you could. Right? How could you possibly decide that when they're dumping shampoo out all over the bathroom, that that's them misbehaving, but when they're, kicking the dog, that that's a reflection of trauma? How could you possibly know? We can't. And so, what if we err on the side of compassion for our kids and just assume that all of their behaviors are a reflection of trauma and respond in that way? So we'll talk about that in a second, but stick with me for a minute because I think that this matters so much more than I ever could have realized. But what if we assume that every behavior, even the ones that don't look like it, sometimes our kids' behaviors can look like them laughing hysterically as they're running around the grocery store, or it might look like um, snickering at a sibling when the sibling is having a rough day, or it might look like um, lying or stealing or sneaking, right? These behaviors can look like so many different things. And I, I just ask yourself, what would happen if I responded to every single behavior as if it were a reflection of trauma? What if I did that for a week or a month or the next 5 years? What if I responded with compassion for my child instead of trying to address their behaviors? What if I looked at every behavior and thought, oh, wow, my child's dumping out the shampoo all over the bathroom. I wonder what's hurting inside of them right now that led to this behavior. I wonder what my child needs from me right now to feel safer so that they can feel safe, feel secure, and not feel a need to engage in these behaviors. Because often what happens, right? So our child's, I don't know, I have the shampoo example. I don't think that that's anything that happened in my home, but I know something I've heard from other families. But what tends to happen is our child engages in this behavior that does not look like a trauma related behavior. Our child engages in this behavior, and we as parents go in there and we try to teach them that that wasn't okay, that that costs money, that now they've lost a privilege, right? We try to go in there to teach and maybe reprimand and, take away some type of reward or dole out some type of consequence. We try to parent them. Meanwhile, what if inside your child that was all driven by trauma? What if inside our child, that behavior happened because they were feeling very scared or hurt or sad inside, and they didn't know what to do with that feeling? And so their body made a decision to dump out the shampoo. What if that's really what's happening? And so you're there as the parent. They're feeling scared or sad or they're grieving. and you as the parent go in there and you're teaching and reprimanding and giving consequences, that is such a mismatch to what your child needs. So here's what I often tell clients that I'm working with is if we look at every behavior as if it's a reflection of trauma, if we look at every behavior as if it is fueled by an awful feeling inside of your child, and then we ask ourselves, what does my child need from me right now? The answer likely will never be that they need you to teach them right from wrong. The answer will never be that in the moment they need you to go and tell them that they made another mistake or that they upset somebody. They already know. If we're approaching every behavior as if it is driven by our child's tricky past, if we approach it with compassion and asking ourselves very candidly, what does my child really need from me right now? Your approach will be different. So I'd love to hear what you come up with as you're really trying to implement this strategy, trying to reflect on what this means for your kiddo. I'd love to hear. So please reach out. I would love to hear what's going on in your family and how I can keep sharing information that can help you show up differently for your kids because you are a good parent. I know that you care so much for your kiddos, and we just we just don't have the right tools in our tool bag because I think that what is I think that research doesn't always match reality. It doesn't always match what's happening in the hearts of us as parents and what's happening in the practical everyday life with our kids. So I hope that you found this strategy so powerful, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. I hope that you found this episode so incredibly powerful. Thank you for joining us for Sometimes Love Isn't Enough. If you resonated with what you heard here, please subscribe to this podcast and give us a review. You can also follow us on all the socials. Check the show notes for all the details about how to start tackling behaviors and creating a powerful, loving relationship with your child, a child who needs your love the most. And if your gut's telling you that it's time for a change now, book a free consult. I'd love to help you love unconditionally and show you that you have that power within you.